And so internal locus of control is simply shifting from the government as in, the government can help me, or maybe it's up to my wife to make me happy. And if she's not behaving the right way, or my husband, if they're not behaving the right way, well, my life's going to suck. That's why I started drinking, because of an abuse. So that's why I started using drugs. Or my doctor prescribed me pills and, didn't tell me that I could get addicted. And now here I am. And that may very well be true. All of that might be true. But what I've realized for myself and for a lot of the clients I've worked with, it's developing that internal locus of control, if you don't already have one, and that 100% ownership.
In no show or movie that I'm aware of, I'm sure there's one or two, but almost none of the time do you have a protagonist who has a victim mentality. They might do bad shit. They might be wrong. Often there's some chance at redemption, whether they get it or not. It's sometimes, a mystery or a matter of debate. But they almost never think like victims. There's a certain amount of treating life strategically and like a game, and accepting, at least taking responsibility for whatever the horrible situation they find themselves in, and then fighting out.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Welcome everyone to episode 181 of the podcast. I'm Matt Finch and I'm here with my co-host Chris Scott. How you doing, Chris?
Doing great. I always let you start the show because I never remember what the podcast episode is. So I appreciate that. It goes by fast. 181.
I think the last two times were the only two times in the past year that I didn't have to look up what episode number it was first. Almost every time right before, what episode is this? You'd think that, doing it twice a week, it would be ingrained in my head what episode we're on. But anyways, you and I were just talking before this a little bit, and I wanted to mention, I don't care where this goes, but I wanted to start off the topic of internal locus of control versus external locus of control. So back in my old life, we'll say when I had mental health disorders, substance use disorder, and not a lot of life skills, not a lot of, I had a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset back then. So my thought processes with the external locus of control was based on what's happening in the world, what's happening in my community, based on external events. That's going to be how my life's going to go. Maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe something good will come along, right? If it's all about like hoping that things will change, or complaining oftentimes, well, like the reason I'm not successful, the reason I'm not doing how I want to is because of this. And it's because of this. It's because of the government. It's because of the administration in office. It's because of, my wife. It's because of, my kids, or it's because of something. And that really puts too much responsibility on external things. And so when I shifted to an internal locus of control, which is wait a second here, all of those things may actually be playing a role, but the biggest role into whether I achieve what I want to or not is my own self. And so it's really not about all these external things. It's about total extreme owner. This is for myself. I don't care how other people live, but extreme ownership of, I created all this stuff, like everything around me right now in my life. I created that. And it was because of my decisions. It was because of my actions. It was because of all the little things, big decisions, small decisions, daily habit things, and everything that is amassed to now is where I am. And so internal locus of control is simply shifting from the government as in, the government can help me, or maybe it's up to my wife to make me happy. And if she's not behaving the right way, or my husband, if they're not behaving the right way, well, my life's going to suck. That's why I started drinking, because of an abuse. So that's why I started using drugs. Or my doctor prescribed me pills and, didn't tell me that I could get addicted. And now here I am. And that may very well be true. All of that might be true. But what I've realized for myself and for a lot of the clients I've worked with, it's developing that internal locus of control if you don't already have one, and that 100% ownership. Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, who did a great TED Talk and has a few awesome books, even kids' books too, that my daughter and I have listened to together on Audible. But he wrote a book, co-authored a book called Extreme Ownership, and living your life from a place of, if shit goes wrong, taking ownership for it if you had anything to do with it all. It's completely counterintuitive too, because most people, and I used to be this way big time, I was really defensive, very defensive. If girlfriends or other people would bring up shortcomings or weaknesses, I was so defensive and so unaware of those behavioral blind spots. So I don't care where we take this. I see so much stuff going on in the world right now. And I want to remind the people that need to hear it that despite all the things that are going on, it may seem like some countries are going mad. It may seem like but really most of the things on earth are good things going on. If you look at it as a whole, and we have so much fucking power within us to create change if we only step into the present moment, figure out exactly what we want or what would be good for us, come up with at least the starting point, and then just keep trying along the way, keep sourcing information, model success, leave clues. Because I see an epidemic getting bigger of people with the victim consciousness, victim mindset, external locus of control, poverty consciousness, victim consciousness, defensive, argumentative, black and white thinking, and people are turning into curmudgeons and, just, and that's not, to me, that's a sign that someone's unhappy. It's not a sign that the world's out of sorts. It's a sign to me that person's out of sorts.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. There are infinite directions in which we could take this. So I'm trying to narrow down the thoughts so I can be coherent here. But I think, we were talking, here's one way to put it. We were talking before this podcast about some of the shows that we like to watch. There are a lot of shows out there. I'm not a show buff or a movie buff. We were talking about Vikings and Peaky Blinders. Now, obviously, there are some famously dualistic and flawed heroes, protagonists in both of those films, and not all shows. And not all shows follow similar themes. Those are particularly manly shows, I guess you could say. But I've noticed that in no show or movie that I'm aware of, I'm sure there's one or two, but almost none of the time do you have a protagonist who has a victim mentality. They might do bad shit. They might be wrong. Often there's some chance at redemption, whether they get it or not is sometimes, a mystery or a matter of debate. But they almost never think like victims. There's a certain amount of treating life strategically and like a game and accepting, at least taking responsibility for whatever the horrible situation they find themselves in, and then fighting out. For all that our culture has changed over the last 100 years or a couple decades, that still seems to be something that's admired. Someone who by circumstance or by birth is in a bad situation and they claw their way out. Maybe they do bad stuff on the way. That makes it interesting. So I'm not saying people should do bad stuff on the way or join an English razor gang or kill people with axes. But it seems to be like an almost permanent aspect of human nature. Like this, we still find this uplifting, even if being a victim is somewhat in vogue these days in certain contexts. That's still something we look up to. We admire it when we see it, especially people who might otherwise have a claim to being victims in some ways. Now, when I was finishing up my drinking career, I had started to slide into nihilism and despair and something of a victim mentality, which was completely at odds with everything I'd ever been taught. And surely in some ways, I was extremely lucky growing up. But like everyone, I always say, scratch the surface of someone, you'll find some traumas or some things that they've had to overcome. So to whatever degree, being adopted, having 60% hearing loss in both of my ears, I sometimes think that I could have pursued things differently. I could have totally avoided people. I've read stories of people with severe hearing loss, such as I have, who have serious problems interpersonally. But I never, and I'm not saying that I'm some kind of hero for people with hearing impairments. It's pretty common. A lot of people lose their hearing over time. But I think that, not letting that define me and not really thinking of it, almost transcending it in a sense, gave me a model for how I dealt with alcohol addiction later. Because I remember joking to a friend after I quit drinking, and I said, well, I'm a deaf, bald alcoholic. And he was like, stop, no more disparaging adjectives. You can go down that path of feeling like a victim. I didn't lose my hair till I was 25, although that's pretty early for most people. And I was flattered to see that some of my friends, after I quit drinking, got in shape and lost my hair, some of them started shaving their heads. So, imitation's the sincerest form of flattery. But there was also, I talk a lot about the biochemical and fitness transformations. I think those are super important. We touched a lot on that in the last episode. But there's also this simultaneous, or maybe slightly lagged, spiritual transformation that occurred as well. I'm far from enlightened, but I went from assuming during my drinking years that external forces controlled my fate to not even worrying about whether that was the case, trying to find as much contentment and happiness as I could from within, being able to sit with myself, close my eyes, direct consciousness into my body, feel relaxed, feel at peace with the universe. Even if an asteroid's about to crash into the earth and obliterate everything we know, at least I have that centeredness. When I started meditating, centered was my first mantra. Eventually, I came up with a different one that I found on the internet, actually, and that became my mantra to this day. It's like an anchor for just letting go. I had someone in my online course who had serious problems with getting into conflicts with people at work, especially her boss. And she said that disengage became her mantra. And she actually found that she was able to increase her power by disengaging at times that she used to get revved up and ultimately act self-destructively. So there's a certain power, ironically, that you get from directing some of your consciousness and energy inwards and sorting that out first, replacing some of the inner chaos with order. And that's a theme that we've seen from people like Jordan Peterson, who his mantra was clean your room. I think there was something to that. Now, being mildly OCD, I've always made my bed. It doesn't matter if the sun's outside and I've just won the lottery. It doesn't matter if my bed isn't made, I'm not going to feel like the world is right. So I've always had a little bit of that. People are different. But as long as you have some order in your inner life and you can sit with yourself, and it takes a while, telling people in early recovery who are going through withdrawal or post-acute withdrawal to sit with themselves can be a torturous thing. I remember the first few times I tried to meditate in Detox, which is where that was one of the few really good things that they did there. They had this old man he had been a priest, and he'd also been severely addicted to alcohol. And he had quit, decades ago and followed the traditional model. He was a very soothing guy, and he would lead these meditation sessions and encourage us to come up with a mantra, put on like rain sounds or reeds, or I don't know if they were binaural beats. I didn't know what those were at the time, but something like that. And we would all just kind of sit and try to be with ourselves. And I remember spazzing out. Like the second I closed my eyes and tried to direct consciousness inwards, I would like get kicked out of my own head. It was the most frustrating thing. Like I wasn't allowed in there. And now, fast forward almost 7 years, I've had a bit of practice. I've had phases where I meditate and phases where I don't. But I always know when I need to come back to it, because it's when I start feeling overwhelmed, like the energy in my head, my mind activity is greater than whatever the centered energy field of my body should be. That's probably the most woo-woo thing I've ever said. But that when I start feeling like that, like my mind's racing and I've lost touch with my body, then I know I need to start meditating again to try to reduce that mental activity, get some inner centeredness. And that's what helps me create inner order, which manifests in things like, well, I guess for some people making their bed, I would have done that anyway, but proactively tackling things that I might put off. Like I had mail from the IRS after I quit drinking that I wouldn't even open because I was terrified. Every time I would see it, I would get like a jolt of adrenaline and my heart would start racing. It turned out I owed like $7 for taxes several years before when I finally opened it. But now, I pull out the weeds. I think that's a Tony Robbins saying, like don't put on rose-colored glasses and say, oh, the weeds are growing, it's fine. Just proactively pull them out and immerse yourself in the moment as you pull them out. And that's a good way to make things better that you otherwise might not understand that you have the power to make better. You stay on top of things. I think there's a certain level of enlightenment that maybe I'm not quite at, but I've realized is maybe possible, where you're simultaneously engaged in your own life and making things better, which does have unintended yet positive consequences for what you might otherwise label external events later on. But you can simultaneously deal with your personal life, your professional life, all of these external things going on, and be so centered spiritually that the world itself just seems like a game to you. A game, an important game, but nonetheless something that you can withdraw from without fleeing to drugs or alcohol, that you can withdraw from at any time in the form of meditation or yoga or whatever your practice is, or even just a mode of consciousness. I read recently The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but he brought up that idea. It kind of built on Michael Singer's The Untethered Self, or The Untethered Soul. Having a mode of consciousness whereby you are like supremely conscious. So much so that what Tolle calls psychological time ceases to be something that rules your life. His whole point in that book is that the only thing that ever exists is the present moment. Unless you're fully immersed in the present moment, you're either stuck in the past or you're stuck in the future, both of which are illusions, because you will never exist in the past or the future. You'll only exist now. And if you can do that effectively, then you will be conscious. You'll exist in a mode of consciousness that's higher, in a sense, than what most people are doing, who are stressing about the lists that they wrote down and things that happened to them in the past and the things that they need to do in the future, and then they miss their whole lives. So I think it's kind of ironic, because we assume that we have to worry a lot about the past and make sure that doesn't happen again. And we have to worry a lot about the future and make sure we're set up for the future. But if that's all we're doing, then we're not centered, because we're not in the here and now. And so there is a way to be in the here and now without becoming a monk who's sitting in a cave. And as I said, I'm not fully enlightened, but it's an interesting idea. And I think I've gotten glimpses of it during yoga and during meditation, sometimes during a walk in nature.
One of the things you said was that you don't feel like necessarily like this huge hero for the hearing impaired community, right?
No, I've never considered it until I said that. So yeah, I definitely don't.
It's very funny that you said that exact wording, because the last episode we did on the video, I forget which high elite shirt you were wearing, but you looked especially pumped up, and the shirt was in such a way I was like, I finally understood. I mean, I've understood, but I really understood. I was watching the video, watching you talk about addiction recovery, alcohol recovery, looking like a fucking alcohol recovery superhero. Like, seriously, like
You're too
the
kind.
character, the persona, the way that you look, the way that you hold yourself and communicate. It's just all what just made so much sense why Fit Recovery has blown up on YouTube and everywhere basically, and why so many people are using your course and using your free content too to totally just obliterate their alcohol addiction and get their shit in order. And it's because they've got someone such as you that's compassionate, bold, and so many other adjectives. It's ridiculous, where all you're really doing is teaching people from life experience plus from all the other things that you've learned on how to customize their own alcohol quitting plan, or even get their drinking under control, if because some people have that ability too. So and now I view at you as also a superstar hero for the hearing impaired community, because that's a lot of hearing loss, big time. And I often forget that about you, because you don't seem to be disabled in any way from it. You seems like you've adjusted very well.
Well, that's a lot of kind words. I'm not sure I deserve all that, but I really appreciate it. And as far as the hearing thing, honestly, I forget it. I don't think of myself, I don't label myself as hearing impaired. I have the kind of hearing impairment that is not really fixed with hearing aids, in my experience. That caused some pain for my parents when I was growing up, because they thought I didn't want to wear the hearing aids out of embarrassment. It wasn't that. It's a decibel issue. It's not a decibel issue. It's a clarity issue. So increasing the noise while leaving the clarity unfixed would just cause me anxiety. And so I, with no solution at hand, I decided to forget about it. And it's a combination of lip reading and maybe some weird part of my brain is compensating, turning the auditory goop into actual words. I don't know, but I don't think about it. And I haven't transcended hearing loss. I still have it, but I'm very glad I don't walk around thinking of myself primarily defined by something that is a birth defect. And actually it was speculated by the doctors that it was caused by alcohol exposure in the womb. So I don't blame my birth mother for that. At some point she must have stopped. Otherwise I could have had full-blown fetal alcohol syndrome. So that's just a thing. It's one of those things, and life is too short for me to think about that. But for anyone out there who happens to be, especially if there's anyone out there who's both addicted to alcohol and has a hearing impairment, I'm more than happy to share my perspective on that. And obviously for someone who's totally deaf, and if they're communicating using sign language, and my hearing is not at that level, I'm probably borderline. And if I hadn't learned to read lips and process sounds a little differently, I probably would have had to learn sign language. But for those people, then there's an actual community, because not everyone knows sign language. So I'm not saying it's bad if you have a community of people who do similar things because of a particular issue. But in my case, I'm grateful that I was able to not define myself by that disability, I guess you could say. It's not something that ever went on a piece of paper, as far as I know, except for my doctors have known about it, but not something that went on a college application or a job application. Is always, I would tell people who, back when I worked in corporate life, that, you might not want to call my name from 60 feet behind me if I can't see you. And I'm not blowing you off. But other than that, it's been kind of a non-issue. I like to make things non-issues, and it's taboo to make alcohol addiction a non-issue, even if you're 50 years alcohol free. According to traditional treatment approaches, you're not supposed to do that. Then you're at risk of relapse or death or institutionalization or jail. I don't see it that way. I see life as short. It's important to be in the present, and you don't want to be dwelling on things that are depressing. except to the extent that you have to figure some things out. But it's always worth transcending, going to the next level, crowding out the bad things with the good things, and having so many good things to focus on that the bad things don't enter your mind, unless they have to for practical reasons. And usually that's temporary. But yeah, I think, and that's another part of taking responsibility for your life. Control is often used in a negative context, but it's a good thing, I think, to control certain elements of your life. As with anything, there's a certain duality. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's a push and pull, a yin and a yang. I've noticed this a lot. Like letting go in the right context is really important, but so is control, right? Self-control, for example, is known to be really important. Relaxation is really important, but hard work is really important too. It's like we have not gurus, that sounds derogatory, but we have inspiring figures. Jocko Willink on one hand, who can help us increase our self-control and our control over our lives and shape our futures. Then we have people like Wayne Dyer, who's more in the zone of letting go and being happy and figuring out what happiness is. I think it's important to have a push and a pull with certain traits. It's almost like there aren't that many traits that are all bad. Even being lazy for a night can be a good thing. So, of course, I guess then it all comes back down to cliches about having balance, which I really don't like. Honestly, I don't really have a balanced diet. I don't have a balanced exercise regimen. I tend to be an extremist in some ways, not ideologically, but with my lifestyle. It's kind of like a little bit of black and white, but they tend to even each other out in other ways.
I love it, man. I love it. And you touched on a topic, well, many topics, but a topic that I really am fascinated by, and that's there's multiple aspects of being a human being. One is human animal. We're animals. We're the apex predators of Earth. The other aspect of it is human spirit. So if you look a few hundred years ago into history, yeah, people were murdering and, colonialism and just lots of stuff was going on. That was hundreds of years ago. That was before human spirit, the human spirit and the collective of all of the population started to evolve. We were, 100 years ago, we were where we were a few hundred years ago. Things have gotten way better now, but we're still, maybe one day we'll be so advanced that these won't be issues. But right now I see this as a huge problem for a lot of people. We're both human spirit and human animal, but oftentimes it's the human animal that is giving us the impulses that is leading to the actions. So human animal is the stuff having the cravings for, going to have an orgy or going to eat a whole bunch of food or do a whole bunch of drugs. That's human animal cravings, biological organism. We need food, water, shelter, all that type of stuff. And we also, humans are driven by pleasure and driven away from pain. So everything we do is to either avoid pain and or gain pleasure. And we'll do much more to avoid pain than we will to gain pleasure. So that's one huge problem. The other huge problem is we are human spirit, but oftentimes human spirit isn't in the driver's seat regarding laying out your schedule for the week. And so there are these different aspects of us where there's an emotional aspect, a physical aspect, a mental aspect, a spiritual aspect. And oftentimes traditional Western medicine just looks, they look for something, they find out what it is, and then they'll treat the symptoms with drugs. Fine. But we also have to take into account the other more nuanced areas of us. Yes, we're physical. That's why medicines can do things to us. But we're also the human spirit, and that's invisible to most people. There's there's psychic people, and there's people that have been, I think, proven to be able to even see auras and re-auras. But that's this huge topic to me. It's like, wait, this is my belief. I don't know if it's true. I certainly can't prove it, but I do believe that there is a spiritual element of us that leaves once the physical body dies. It leaves, and it goes to the next phase, which is not of the physical world at all. It's the realm of souls. That's my belief. And I also believe that before we come to Earth in this lifetime, that we chose our parents, that we chose our exact parents, and we chose the life. And I certainly can't prove this at all, but I've read a lot of books that we chose this particular incarnation. And there have been many therapists or hypnotherapists that don't even know each other, that live in different places, that have published texts on their decades of work, hypnotizing people into their life between lives phase of their journey of souls. And so according to many different people that have done this, and certainly you could call them a quack if you wanted to, certainly it goes against a lot of different beliefs, and I can't prove it, like I said. But if we do have different lifetimes to learn different lessons, and if we did actually, as souls in the soul world, choose the parents and choose a lot of different things of our life, wouldn't that be ironic if that was the truth, to see all these people being victims for their circumstances, and when literally, if this is true, they literally chose those dire circumstances to learn those lessons, to grow, to have that human experience. And then maybe next. So I know that's a huge thing to throw out there. It could be totally false, but I like to think about that stuff. I like to entertain stuff like that, because it's if these people that were very one of the guys, like Dr. Michael Newton, was totally atheist. As a hypnotherapist, he wouldn't do anything like that. He only would do early childhood. He would regress people back to early childhood. He would just laugh at people when they asked him to regress them into a past life. He's like, oh, that's bullshit. Da, 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 da. He did it on accident. So if people want to learn more about this topic, just check out the book called Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. You'll thank me later, or you'll curse my name later because it's so blasphemous to certain beliefs. But I like to entertain those things,
If we had some THC oil, we could make this a 4-hour podcast, and preferably in person. But yeah, as I've often said, I was a rationalist, skeptic, science, evidence-based only person before I quit drinking.
Before you met me.
Before I met you, probably. But also, it wasn't just that. I mean, it was in Detox when I was sitting in the chapel. We had this like non-denominational chapel where you could sit, and I would just meditate sometimes. But one particular time I went in there, and a ray of light seemed to be dancing slowly towards me, but it seemed to be imbued with some odd sort of consciousness that I had never perceived before. So at the very least, I was in a different mode of consciousness. I guess a scientist would say, well, your brain was maybe functioning differently. You had more alpha waves at that time than I don't even know. So that's one interpretation. And I was just, trying to anthropomorphize is not the right word, but do something with the ray of light that wasn't there, or there is something else there. And there are other dimensions at work, literally or figuratively, that we don't perceive. And maybe we don't know everything as humans, even though it seems sometimes like we do. That seems more likely to me. We don't need to quantify it. One of the great things that was said to me in early recovery, actually when I was still in detox, by the old man who led the former priest who led those meditation sessions, because I would come up to him with questions about all sorts of things. And I wanted him to know exactly what the answer was so I could write it down. That's kind of how I've always been. I don't remember what I asked him, but it was probably some giant cosmological mystery. And I expected him to say, oh, well, yes, of course, this, and that. A, B, C, D, E, and F, that kind of logical response. But his response was, don't try to expunge the mystery in life, because then you'll miss out on all the fun. And there's something to that effect, if not verbatim, but that stayed with me. Like, don't try to rationalize away the mystery of life. If you do that, you're missing out. Life's too short to do that. And so why not entertain things? It's one thing to become a tin hat conspiracy theorist and, kill yourself because you think there's aliens, passing by Earth. It's another thing to just be open to broader questions. And so I try to do that. But one thing that I've definitely started to believe since quitting drinking is that we don't live in a malevolent universe. Whatever's going on, it's not evil. It's not malevolent. There is evil in the world. There's malevolence. There's murder and all sorts of horrible things. But I no longer think that the universe is structured in such a way that that's the dominant force. It wasn't clear to me that that was the case when I was a drinker. I was somehow simultaneously a nihilist and rationalist skeptic. And at the same time, I kind of just assumed that I lived in a malevolent universe, mainly because I couldn't figure out why I drank and why I would be put here to live a pretty successful early life only to drown in my own alcohol addiction. You could see how hopelessness and despair would creep into that. But it doesn't make sense to think that, there's a certain dark, malevolent force in your life and also be a rationalist, skeptic, nihilist. It doesn't make any sense. So eventually, luckily, I stopped being the nihilistic, rationalist, skeptic person, and I started becoming more of an optimist. I had to be an optimist. I had to fake it till I made it in many ways. That's part of reframing alcohol as a moot substance. I had to believe that it was a toxic, horrible substance before I had to say that to myself before I really believed it, even though we have evidence that shows that it's a toxin. But I also came to think that despite the fact that not all of the events of our lives are benevolent, whatever the structure of the system is, I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's malevolent. And that helped me retreat into myself to try to be in touch with whatever the cosmos is. And I don't know what's going on there from a brain scan or science perspective, but it is an experience that I've certainly had. With my mantra, I can often, if I close my eyes, I can start to flood my body with consciousness. I can feel it coming out of my mind. So my mind's not thinking, like, oh, what should we have for breakfast tomorrow? We got to make an appointment for the dogs next week. And then, oh, that happened last week. And sometimes just weird stuff. My self-talk will be like, I wonder how you say milk with a Russian accent, like just crazy stuff. Just constantly going. Sometimes it's entertaining, but sometimes I just wanted to shut up. And so I can kind of direct the energy into my body, not have my brain going hyperactive. And it's almost like I'm in touch with something. I don't know what it is, but it is not a bad thing. With that said, I'm still terrified of psychedelics, so I don't want to go meet it. I'm not going to smoke DMT and figure out what it is. I feel like I probably would maybe I'd figure it out. So I'm not quite there yet. All of this is a work in progress for me. I'm the supplement guy. I'm not the spiritual guru. But it is interesting. And I think it does have to play a role for everyone in addiction recovery, at least to speculate about these things. Maybe not everyone's curious, although it'd be hard for me to see how you could exist on this earth and not wonder about such things.
Yeah. And, I grew up, my parents never took us to church when we were kids. They were always very spiritual, but, actually my mom would go to church sometimes. She was in a church choir and we'd go see her sing and we'd go for Christmas and stuff. So my mom was into it, but I did start going to a Presbyterian church in around maybe age 11 or something. On the Sunday morning service, I'd go with my best friend at the time and his mom. It was just the two of them. The dad had passed away of cancer. So I'd go mostly just for the free donuts for breakfast, and then we go to McDonald's for lunch afterwards. I didn't get that stuff growing up with two hippies meditating herbalists. I was getting tofu and tuna fish salad on rice cakes with sprouts, alfalfa sprouts and stuff. So yeah, I didn't get like chicken nuggets, French fries, and Coca-Cola. So that's why I would go. But it was also fun, sometimes I did like the sermons. It was all positive people. So while I don't go to any organized religion right now, I found a lot of the times, and of course there can be differences too, but I really like that positive energy. I did the Tristan youth group there too for a few years when I was a teenager. And the counselors, the other kids that were going, it was pretty wealthy church too, establishment. We did fun stuff. And, I don't go to church anymore, but man, I don't want to live in a universe where there's not a God or some type of plan thing, like if this is an accident, well, man, that'd be pretty crazy. So what I found for at least myself was my life only started to get much better once I felt like I had some spiritual beliefs that made some sense to me. So it was only after I read Journey of Souls, I always wanted to know, why are we here? What is our purpose? And then where are we going afterwards? And I had read many texts based on that, and nothing ever like made perfect sense to me. Some things made some sense. But this book was so it seems like a science fiction book. And I think that's the section it's under, is science fiction. It's just the most wild stuff. It's actual, a lot of it is the transcriptions of recorded audio sessions of Dr. Michael Newton regressing these people into their life between lives and then recording the conversation. And so it's them talking, not as their human self presently, but as their soul self before they came into this life. So it's trippy. Even if people don't believe it, it's a really good book because it's so it gets your brain thinking in ways you've probably never thought before. And at least for myself and for a lot of other people, it's a very popular book. It helped me feel okay, I feel like this could be true, and that's what I'm going to believe until I find something that makes more sense. So I'm not like attached to even that belief. If something else makes more sense, trying to always be permeable enough to where I can entertain those things and maybe disqualify them, but even then that's just my belief, and who cares? It's just me. It's only I've realized how my beliefs are probably the biggest factor determining my life. So I'm trying to keep good beliefs that make that. It's like David Goggins. He believes that when he dies, he's going to be face to face with God, and God's going to have a checklist. Be like, I had you down for this. You were supposed to become a Navy SEAL, and that's about it, right? But all this other stuff, all these ultra marathons, these triathlons, the pull-up contest, Guinness Book of World Records, this, becoming this YouTube or the social media star, helping so many people. That's his belief that God's going to be there with him, and that's what he believes. And that's what drives him so hard, is he really wants to meet face to face with God and say, I went way past what you even had in store for me. He legit believes that, and then look at his life because of that belief.
Yeah. Well, I think let's keep this one short and sweet, because we'll probably revisit all of these topics in the not distant future.
Sounds good.